And there is a man standing in a room full of doctors, lawyers, teachers, and engineers. He is not especially tall. His voice is not the deepest in the room. He has no formal credentials on the wall, no published papers, no verifiable track record. And yet, within 18 months, every single person in that room will have signed over their savings, cut off their families, and relocated their entire lives to follow him. That is not a hypothetical. That happened. It happened with Jim Jones in Jonestown, with Keith Raniere in NXIVM, with Marshall Applewhite in Heaven's Gate. And the people who followed them were not broken, desperate, or stupid. And now they were, by every external measure, exactly the kind of people you would trust to make rational decisions. So here is the question that actually matters. Not how could those people be so foolish? Because that question assumes you are immune. And the real question is, what specific mechanism inside the human brain does a charismatic manipulator target? And what does that mechanism feel like from the inside when it is being exploited? Because it does not feel like manipulation. That is the whole point. It feels like clarity. It feels like finally being understood. It feels sometimes like love. Understanding that feeling, where it comes from, how it is engineered, and how to recognize it before it has you, is what this video is actually about. Charisma is not magic. It is a technology. It is a learnable, deployable set of behaviors that triggers specific neurochemical responses in the people who experience it. And most people who have genuine charisma developed it unconsciously through years of trial, error, and social calibration. And cult leaders and the modern online gurus who share their techniques develop it deliberately. They study what works, and they refine it, they scale it. And the unsettling truth is that the same psychological mechanisms that make you susceptible to a cult leader also make you susceptible to certain bosses, romantic partners, political figures, and social media personalities. The context changes. The underlying architecture does not. And to what you are going to understand by the end of this video is not a list of warning signs to memorize. And the fine signs are easy to dismiss in the moment. What you are going to understand is the logic, internal logic of how charismatic seduction works, step by step, from first contact to total dependency. You understand the logic. You can see it operating in real time. And when you can see it, it loses most of its power over you. And there are 5 stages. They do not always happen in perfect sequence, but they always happen. And the first stage is called mirroring, and it is so effective that most people never recognize it even when they are told about it. You meet someone who seems to understand you immediately, someone who finishes your thoughts, who holds your exact same grievances. In my eyes, who seems to have arrived at the same unusual conclusions about the world through completely independent means. Your brain does something specific. It releases oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone. Now, the same chemical that fires when a mother looks at her newborn. And the same chemical that wires 2 people together during deep friendship or love. Oxytocin does not produce euphoria. It produces something quieter and more dangerous. It produces trust, automatic, pre-rational trust. And the key thing about trust that has been chemically triggered is that it precedes evaluation. You trust first, and you look for reasons to justify the trust. And this is backwards from how we like to think we operate, but it is how we actually operate almost every time. And Jim Jones, by multiple accounts from survivors, was extraordinarily skilled at this. He would meet someone once, learn details about their life, in their losses, their fears, and then, weeks later, he would appear to have knowledge of those things without being told. He would call people by name at mass services he had never attended. He would describe the private struggles of strangers in the crowd. What looked like supernatural knowledge was, in reality, a network of informants feeding him personal details, and combined with his own sharp reading of human pain. He did not know people. He performed knowing people. And the performance was close enough to the real thing that the neurological response was identical. This is the first thing to understand about charismatic manipulation. It exploits the brain's inability to distinguish between genuine intimacy and performed intimacy when the performance is skilled enough. And the warmth feels real because the neurological response is real, even when the source of that warmth is entirely calculated. Modern online gurus do this at scale. They use data, comment sections, DMs, community forums to understand their audiences deeply. They speak to private fears in public language. They make millions of people simultaneously feel individually understood. And oxytocin still fires. The trust still builds. At scale, the practical implication of this is not to distrust warmth. And warmth is real and necessary, and often genuine. The implication is to notice when understanding arrives too quickly, too completely, and too perfectly matched to your specific worldview and your specific wounds. And genuine understanding between people is usually gradual. It accrues through friction, through misunderstanding, through repair. When it appears instantaneous and frictionless, that is worth slowing down for. The second stage is the construction of a special world. And this is where things begin to accelerate. Every cult, without exception, operates on a foundational premise. The people outside this circle are asleep. D are deceived, corrupted, incomplete. Whatever vocabulary fits the doctrine. The people inside the circle have been given access to something that most people never find. A truth, a mission, a level of consciousness, and the leader is the one who grants that access. This is not incidental to the appeal. It is the appeal. Because the desire to belong to something that matters, something exclusive, something that separates you from the ordinary noise of the world, is not a weakness of broken people. It is a core human drive. Psychologists call it the need for significance. It is the same drive that motivates people to pursue difficult careers, to join elite military units, to build companies from nothing. And the drive itself is healthy. What cult leaders do is capture that drive and redirect it toward dependency on themselves. Keith Raniere, NXIVM, into an organization that collected thousands of followers, including Hollywood actresses and heiresses, and particularly calculated about this. He did not present himself as a religious figure. He presented himself as a scientist of human potential. He had metrics, programs, rankings. His followers did not feel like cult members, and they felt like students of an unusually rigorous curriculum, gaining access to psychological tools that ordinary people would never encounter. And the language was secular and modern. The structure was identical to every high control group that preceded him. Inside-outside distinction creates what psychologists call in-group bias on an accelerated timeline. And find once you understand yourself as part of a group that sees something others cannot see. Mirror evaluation of information from outside the group changes, criticisms, criticism, in tops being information and starts being evidence of the critic's limited perception. And the person who says this looks dangerous becomes automatically someone who doesn't get it. In mechanism that should protect you, the ability to take warnings seriously has been dismantled and replaced with its inverse. And the way to stay protected against this specific mechanism is simple in concept and difficult in practice. Maintain relationships outside the group that matter to you more than your standing within it. And not because those outside relationships are necessarily wiser, but because they preserve your ability to hear things you do not want to hear. The moment you notice yourself evaluating information primarily through the lens of how a group will receive it, you are already inside a structure that has begun to compromise your judgment. And a third stage is intermittent reinforcement, and it is the one that produces the deepest, most chemically durable form of attachment. And most people understand, on some level, that consistent love and consistent approval are good for psychological health. And what is less widely understood is that inconsistent love and inconsistent approval create a far more powerful bond. And that bond is addictive in the clinical sense of the word. B.F. Skinner demonstrated this with pigeons in the 1950s. A pigeon that receives a food pellet every time it presses a lever will press the lever reliably and then stop fairly quickly when the pellets stop coming. And a pigeon that receives a pellet only sometimes unpredictably will press the lever compulsively. It will press it hundreds of times after the pellets stop entirely. The unpredictability, not the reward, is what creates the compulsion. Human beings are not pigeons, but the dopaminergic mechanism Skinner was studying is the same one that operates in human attachment. You never know whether you will receive warmth or coldness, approval or criticism from someone you have come to depend on. Your brain does not conclude that the relationship is unreliable. Your brain becomes fixated on obtaining the reward. And the pursuit becomes the center of your attention in a way that consistent warmth never could. And cult leaders use this with extraordinary precision, often without being consciously aware they are doing it. Jim Jones alternated between expressing profound love for his congregation and subjecting individual members to public humiliation. In 1 week, a person was the most important member of the community. The next week, they were singled out in a group session and their failures cataloged in front of hundreds of people. Into oscillation was not random. It was tuned to keep people working for approval they could never quite secure. Inexact modern high-control figures do this in subtler form. The online guru who responds to some comments and ignores others, and the leader who showers a protege with attention for months and then grows cold without explanation, and the teacher who calls a student a future great 1 week and barely acknowledges them the next. Each of these creates the same compulsive orientation toward the source of the reward. In the tell for anyone trying to see it clearly is the quality of the attention you give to a person when they are not present. If you find yourself replaying interactions, trying to understand what went wrong, strategizing about how to return to a period of warmth, and this pattern is consuming a disproportionate share of your mental energy. Neurochemistry of intermittent reinforcement is already operating. And that is not a sign of deep connection. It is a sign of a dependency loop that has been, intentionally or not, installed. In these, the 4th stage is the inversion of doubt, and it is the stage that closes the trap. Healthy cray. Cynical thinking treats doubt as useful. Doubt is the faculty that protects you from bad investments, false friends, and poor decisions. In a healthy relationship or organization, doubt is welcomed, engaged with, and resolved, or held honestly when it cannot be resolved. In a high control system, doubt is pathologized. It is reframed as a symptom. In religious cults, doubt is a sign of spiritual weakness or corruption. In secular groups built around human potential or business, doubt is evidence that you have not done the inner work. You are not ready. You are holding yourself back. The problem is not the leader's claim. The problem is your inability to receive it. And this inversion is the most elegant trap in the architecture of manipulation because it converts the mechanism of protection into its opposite. Your critical thinking, properly functioning, is raising a flag. But the flag has been redefined as the problem into resting the flag, doing more inner work, surrendering doubt. Going deeper takes you further in, not further out. And Marshall Applewhite built Heaven's Gate on precisely this structure. He told his followers that their reluctance, their questions, and their lingering attachments to the outside world were evidence of the influence of what he called Luciferians, and forces keeping them from ascending. Every reservation became evidence that the reservation itself was an attack, and there was no move a member could make that the doctrine could not absorb and use to demand deeper compliance. And this is the stage where the word cult finally applies, in the technical sense that sociologists use it, and not because the beliefs are unusual. Unusual beliefs are simply unusual, but because the system has made itself unfalsifiable. A belief system you cannot question without that questioning being used as evidence against you is not a belief system. It is a closed loop. And the protection against this stage is prior knowledge of its existence. Once you know that self-sealing logic is a technique, and cues to peg you as it works, you can recognize its signature. Anytime a system tells you that your doubt about the system is itself your problem to overcome, you are looking at a closed loop, and that does not automatically make the system wrong about everything else. It means you are inside a structure that has disabled one of your most important cognitive protections, and you should know that. In the fifth stage is the sunk cost, and by this point, the manipulation barely needs to be maintained. The follower maintains it for the leader. Informal beings are not rational actors when it comes to prior investment. We know this. Every behavioral economist who has studied the phenomenon confirms it. We continue in failing relationships because we have already given so much. We hold losing stocks because selling would make the loss real. And defend choices we secretly regret because admitting the regret means admitting we were wrong. And the cost of that admission feels higher than the cost of continuing. In a high control group, the sunk costs are engineered deliberately, and early members are asked to make sacrifices, to give money, and to cut contact with family, to relocate, to participate in acts that would embarrass them if known to the outside world. In these sacrifices are not incidental. They are load-bearing. Each sacrifice raises the internal cost of leaving, because leaving means acknowledging that the sacrifice was made for something false. NXIVM required its female members in a secret subgroup called DOS to provide collateral. Before joining, compromising photographs, both fotos, imaging personal confessions, letters, making false accusations against family members. And this collateral was framed as a spiritual exercise in vulnerability and trust. Its actual function was to make leaving nearly impossible, not just because the collateral could be released, into because holding the collateral meant the members' own hands had built the bars of the cage. And people stayed, not because they were too unintelligent to see the situation clearly. And they stayed because seeing it clearly meant accepting that they had participated in their own capture. Into it all is a level of self-confrontation that most people, under any circumstances, find extraordinarily difficult. And the manipulation had not just changed what they believed, it had changed what they were able to afford to believe in. The practical lesson here reaches beyond cult membership. And sunk cost thinking is in operation any time you find yourself unable to evaluate a situation fresh because of what you have already put in. And not because prior investment is irrelevant. It is not always irrelevant. And choose kind read back together. But when the primary argument for continuing is that you have already come this far, you are reasoning backwards. And the question is always whether the future from this point forward is worth the cost of the future. And the low is behind you, regardless. These 5 stages mirroring the special world, intermittent reinforcement, inversion of doubt, and the sunk cost are not a checklist you run through once and then feel safe. In Nye, they are ongoing processes. They can be restarted at any point, and they operate in groups, but they also operate in one-on-one relationships, in ideological communities, in professional hierarchies. And here is what matters most about understanding them. The people who are most vulnerable to them are not the people who lack intelligence. And more research on cult membership consistently shows that high-achieving, intellectually confident people are, in some respects, more vulnerable. Because their confidence in their own judgment makes them slower to seek O. Inside perspective, once the capture has begun, they are certain that if something were genuinely wrong, they would see it. Ensure that certainty is exactly what the architecture exploits. The psychologist Robert Lifton spent years studying thought reform processes, first in the context of POWs who had been subjected to intensive political indoctrination in Chinese prison camps, and later in American cults. In those COD, what he found, documented in his 1961 book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, was that the techniques worked with approximately equal effectiveness across educational levels, personality types, and prior ideological commitments. And the factor that predicted resistance was not intelligence. It was prior exposure to the techniques themselves. And people who knew the architecture could see it assembling around them. People who did not, could not. That is what this video is. Not a warning, and not a list of red flags. It is a map of the architecture, and a map is useful only if you carry it with you. And there is one final thing worth saying about charismatic manipulators, and it is the part that is most uncomfortable to sit with. And many of them, perhaps most of them, are not purely cynical. Jim Jones, in the early years of People's Temple, and built genuine interracial community in a segregated America and fed thousands of people who had no other support. He believed, for a time, at least partially, in what he preached. Keith Raniere was genuinely convinced, by most accounts, and that he had discovered something about human potential that the world was too limited to understand. The belief and the manipulation coexisted. The good they did and the harm they caused were not separate phenomena. They were produced by the same person, operating from the same engine. And this matters because it means the warning sign is not that a person is wholly bad. People who are wholly bad are easy to dismiss. The magnetic ones are the ones who are genuinely compelling, genuinely insightful in some areas, and genuinely capable of producing real experiences of growth or meaning, and who also, somewhere in the architecture of how they operate, inquire dependency rather than freedom as the price of access to those experiences. A teacher who makes you more capable of independent thought over time is a teacher. A teacher who makes your independent thought increasingly contingent on their approval is something else entirely, regardless of how much you learn in the room. And the question is not whether you feel transformed. Transformation is real, and it can happen in many contexts. The question is whether the transformation is building your capacity to live without the source, or building your incapacity to live without it, and whether the clarity you feel in their presence is yours to keep, or whether it slowly becomes available only in their presence. You find yourself asking that question honestly. You can turn it on a relationship or a group or a community you are already inside and hold it there without flinching. You have already done something most people are never willing to do. You have chosen to see clearly at the cost of comfort, and that choice, practiced repeatedly, is the only real immunity. Names in this story, Jones, Raniere, Applewhite, are historical markers, but the techniques have no fixed address and move through time. They adapt to new mediums. And televangelist becomes the productivity guru, becomes the online tribe leader, becomes whatever form comes next. The delivery system evolves. In the 5 stages, do not. And what you carry out of this video is not protection against a particular person or a particular type of group. It is something closer to a calibrated internal sense, a way of noticing when warmth arrives too perfectly. When doubt is being turned against you, when leaving feels structurally impossible in ways that have nothing to do with the merits of staying. And carry that sense. Use it early. Use it when everything still feels right, because that is exactly when the architecture is most invisible. In motion. And time to examine a room is before the door closes, not after. If this kind of analysis reaches you in a way that stays with you, leave a comment below with this. Tell me about a time you recognized a manipulation in any context, not just cults, only in retrospect. Not just cults, only in retrospect. Not because the stories are entertainment, but because they are data. And the more clearly we can map the moments when our own judgment was in operation but compromised, and more precisely we understand how this actually works in practice, in that conversation is more useful than anything that could be said in a single video. And that this video, if it gave you something genuinely worth thinking about, and Privact together. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of analysis, the kind that does not tell you to be afraid, but does expect you to think. And there are no shortcuts in here, just the actual architecture of how influence works and what you do with that knowledge.